The Boeing 737 was cruising at 37,000 feet over the Nevada desert when Captain Richard Morrison collapsed across the center console, his body suddenly rigid before going completely limp, and the only person aboard who could prevent the deaths of 163 passengers and crew was sitting in seat 12C wearing jeans and an Army t-shirt, a woman nobody suspected had once commanded the skies in ways that had made her a legend throughout the entire special operations community. Before you watch complete story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Major Maya Chin sat quietly by the window watching the afternoon sunlight paint golden shadows across the desert mountains below, looking exactly like what the flight attendants and passengers assumed she was, a Black Hawk helicopter pilot heading home after completing her rotation at Fort Carson in Colorado. She had boarded the flight from Denver to Los Angeles wearing casual civilian clothes with only her Army-issue backpack suggesting military service, and when the friendly businessman in the adjacent seat had asked about her work during boarding, she had smiled and said simply that she flew helicopters for the Army, which was technically true even though it left out absolutely everything that mattered about who she really was and what she had accomplished during 15 years of military aviation that had taken her from fighter cockpits to special operations missions that remained classified at the highest levels of government. The businessman had nodded politely and returned to his laptop, satisfied with the brief explanation, never suspecting that the quiet woman beside him had once flown F-16 Fighting Falcons in combat over Iraq and Syria, had coordinated strike packages that had eliminated high-value terrorist targets, had executed emergency rescues under fire that had saved dozens of American lives, and had earned a call sign that was spoken with reverence and awe throughout fighter squadrons and special operations units across every branch of the military. Her call sign was Valkyrie, given to her after a mission over Syria where she had single-handedly coordinated the rescue of a downed pilot while simultaneously directing air strikes against enemy positions and flying her own damaged F-16 back to base on one engine with battle damage that should have killed her. The mission had earned her the Distinguished Flying Cross and made her famous in military aviation circles. But Maya never discussed it with civilians because the missions she flew were not stories for casual airplane conversations. After 8 years flying fighters and accumulating over 1,500 combat hours in some of the most dangerous airspace in the world, Maya had made the unexpected decision to transition to Army aviation and Black Hawk helicopters, a move that had shocked her fellow fighter pilots but had been driven by her desire to work more directly with ground forces and special operations teams. The transition had required starting over in many ways, learning rotary wing aircraft from the basics despite her extensive fixed-wing experience, but Maya had approached helicopter training with the same intensity she had brought to fighters, earning her Black Hawk qualification and eventually her position flying special operations missions with the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the legendary Night Stalkers who supported America's most elite combat units. She had been flying Black Hawks for 3 years now, combining her fighter pilot tactical thinking with helicopter precision to become one of the most capable special operations pilots in the Army, but when people asked what she did, she simply said she flew helicopters because explaining the rest would have meant revealing operations that remained classified and achievements that would have sounded like bragging. The flight from Denver had been routine so far, the 737 climbing smoothly through clear skies before leveling off at cruise altitude for the 2-hour flight to Los Angeles. Maya had been looking forward to a quiet trip home, maybe catching up on sleep after 2 weeks of intensive training exercises that had involved night missions, combat simulations and coordination with Air Force assets that had tested her ability to manage complex operations under pressure. She had removed her boots and settled into her seat with a book, declining the flight attendant's offer of snacks and drinks, content to simply relax and enjoy the rare luxury of being a passenger rather than the pilot responsible for keeping an aircraft in the sky. The cabin was about half full, mostly business travelers and families heading to California for various reasons, and the atmosphere was relaxed with people reading, working on laptops, or sleeping as the 737 droned westward through the afternoon sky. Maya had noticed the pilots during boarding, both men appearing to be in their 50s with the calm professional demeanor of airline captains who had logged tens of thousands of hours in commercial aviation, and she had felt the familiar sense of kinship that aviators shared regardless of whether they flew helicopters, fighters, or passenger jets. Flying was flying, and anyone who had devoted their life to aviation understood the unique combination of technical skill, decision-making ability, and sheer love of flight that defined the profession. 2 flight attendants worked the cabin, a younger woman named Jessica who had introduced herself cheerfully during boarding, and an older gentleman named Robert who had the experienced efficiency of someone who had been doing this job for decades. They moved through the cabin with practiced ease, serving drinks and responding to passenger requests with the kind of automatic competence that came from countless repetitions of the same routine. Maya had smiled when Jessica paused at her row and noticed the Army t-shirt, asking if she was military, and Maya had confirmed that yes, she was an Army helicopter pilot based at Fort Carson. Jessica had thanked her for her service with genuine warmth, and Maya had nodded graciously while privately thinking about the missions she had flown that would never be discussed in polite conversation aboard commercial airliners. The medical emergency began without warning 53 minutes into the flight. Maya was reading her book when she heard a sudden commotion from the front of the cabin, urgent voices speaking in clipped tones that immediately triggered her combat-trained situational awareness. She looked up to see Jessica rushing toward the cockpit with a worried expression, and Robert was already on the cabin intercom making an announcement that sent a chill through everyone aboard. "Ladies and gentlemen, if there is a doctor or medical professional on board, please identify yourself to the flight attendants immediately." Maya felt her pulse quicken as she watched Jessica disappear into the cockpit, the door remaining open in violation of standard security procedures, which meant something was seriously wrong with the flight crew. Other passengers were murmuring nervously, and Maya unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, her training overriding the instinct to remain seated like a passive passenger. She moved quickly toward the front of the cabin where Robert was coordinating with passengers, and she caught his attention with a calm but authoritative voice. "I'm a military pilot. What's happening?" Robert's face showed relief mixed with stress. The captain collapsed. "The first officer is trying to handle it but he's overwhelmed. Do you have any medical training?" Maya shook her head. "Limited combat first aid, nothing that would help here. But I can help with the aircraft if needed. I have extensive aviation experience." She deliberately did not elaborate on exactly how extensive that experience was, but her tone conveyed absolute confidence, and Robert made a quick decision. "Come with me." He led her toward the cockpit, and Maya followed while her mind automatically began running through emergency procedures for commercial aircraft even though she had never actually flown a 737. The principles were the same regardless of the specific aircraft type. Maintain control, assess the situation, execute appropriate procedures and communicate with air traffic control. She had handled emergencies in fighters and helicopters that had been far more dangerous than anything a commercial airliner would normally face, and she felt her training taking over as she prepared to assess whatever crisis awaited in the cockpit. The scene inside the cockpit was chaotic but not yet critical. Captain Morrison was slumped in his seat, unconscious and unresponsive, while the first officer, a younger man whose name tag read Anderson, was simultaneously trying to check the captain's vital signs while maintaining control of the aircraft. The autopilot was engaged, keeping the 737 stable in cruise flight, but Anderson's face showed the stress of someone dealing with more emergencies than he could handle alone. He looked up as Maya entered the cockpit, and his expression showed both hope and confusion at seeing a female passenger in casual clothes. "I'm Major Maya Chen, U.S. Army," Maya said immediately, her voice calm and professional. "I'm a military pilot with extensive emergency experience. How can I assist?" Anderson's relief was visible. "Captain Morrison collapsed about 2 minutes ago. I think it's a heart attack. He's breathing but unresponsive. I've declared a medical emergency with ATC and we're diverting to Las Vegas, but I need help managing him and I can't leave the controls." Maya moved quickly to assess Captain Morrison, checking his pulse and breathing while her mind categorized the situation. Pulse was present but irregular, breathing shallow, skin color poor. Definitely a cardiac event, possibly a heart attack or stroke. He needed immediate medical attention but there was nothing they could do for him at 37,000 feet except get him on the ground as quickly as safely possible. He's stable for now but he needs paramedics urgently. Focus on flying the aircraft and getting us to Las Vegas. I'll coordinate the emergency response and handle everything else. Anderson nodded gratefully and turned his attention back to the instruments, communicating with Las Vegas Center to confirm their diversion and emergency status. Maya stepped back slightly to give him room to work while she assessed the broader situation. The 737 was stable in autopilot with all systems showing normal, but they needed to begin descending and configuring for landing at Las Vegas McCarran Airport, which was approximately 80 miles ahead. The weather was clear, traffic was being cleared from their path, and emergency services would be standing by, which meant the actual landing should be straightforward as long as Anderson kept his composure and executed proper procedures. But Maya's combat-trained instincts were telling her that Anderson was more stressed than the situation warranted, and as she watched him fumbling with radio controls and cross-checking instruments with unnecessary frequency, She realized that he was borderline panicking despite his professional training. He was flying the aircraft adequately, but his decision-making was degrading under pressure, and Maya recognized the signs of someone who had never faced a truly critical emergency before and was discovering that simulator training did not fully prepare you for the psychological stress of real crisis situations. She had seen the same thing in young fighter pilots during their first combat missions, the gap between knowing procedures intellectually and executing them under stress when lives depended on getting everything exactly right. Maya made a quick decision. First Officer Anderson, I'm going to assist with communications and emergency coordination so you can focus entirely on flying. I have experience managing complex aviation emergencies and I can take some of the workload off you. She kept her tone supportive rather than commanding, framing her offer as assistance rather than taking over, but her confidence and calm demeanor had an immediate effect on Anderson's stress level. That would help tremendously, Anderson admitted, his voice showing relief. I'm qualified and current, but I've never actually had to handle something like this alone. The captain was the experienced one. You're doing fine, Maya assured him. The aircraft is stable, we have a good diversion airport and emergency services will be ready. All you need to do is fly the approach and landing exactly like you've practiced thousands of times. I'll handle everything else. She settled into the jump seat behind the two pilot positions, where she could see all the instruments and displays while staying out of Anderson's way. From this position she could monitor the situation and provide assistance without physically taking over the controls, which would have been technically problematic given that she was not rated or current in the 737 despite her extensive aviation background. Las Vegas Center came back on the radio with instructions for their descent and approach, and Maya listened carefully as Anderson acknowledged and began configuring the aircraft. He reduced power and started descending, but Maya noticed he was rushing the procedures slightly, descending faster than optimal for passenger comfort. Take your time with the descent, she said quietly. We have plenty of distance to Las Vegas. A smooth descent will keep the passengers calmer and give you more time to set up the approach properly. Anderson immediately adjusted his descent rate, and Maya saw his shoulders relax slightly as he realized she was right. They had time, there was no need to rush, and proper procedure was more important than speed. Thank you, he said. I was starting to panic a bit. Completely understandable, Maya replied. Your captain is down, you're alone, and you have over 100 lives depending on you. That's intense pressure. But you have all the skills you need. Trust your training and execute the procedures exactly like you've practiced. She was using the same coaching techniques she had developed working with young special operations pilots, providing calm guidance that reinforced confidence while subtly steering decision-making toward optimal outcomes. They continued descending through 30,000 feet, and Maya monitored Captain Morrison while simultaneously watching the cockpit instruments and Anderson's performance. The 737 was handling perfectly, all systems normal, and Anderson was settling into a rhythm as his initial panic faded under Maya's steady presence. Las Vegas approach control vectored them toward the airport, clearing traffic and setting them up for a straight-in approach to runway 25 left, the longest runway at McCarran that would give Anderson maximum margin for error. Then Maya heard something on the radio that made her attention sharpen immediately. Las Vegas approach was coordinating with military traffic, and she heard a call sign that made her pulse quicken. Blade Flight, 2 F-22s currently on training mission northwest of Las Vegas. The approach controller was positioning the F-22 Raptors to provide assistance if needed, standard procedure for commercial aircraft emergencies that might require visual assessment or coordination with military assets. Maya knew the F-22 pilots would be monitoring their emergency frequency, and she made a quick decision that would reveal more about her background than she had intended. She keyed the intercom to speak to Anderson. The F-22s they just mentioned can provide visual support if needed. I have experience coordinating with fighter aircraft and I can communicate with them directly if that would help. Anderson nodded agreement, focused on flying, and Maya switched to the tactical frequency she knew the Raptors would be monitoring. Blade Flight, this is Valkyrie. She used her call sign instinctively, the name that had defined her identity for 8 years of fighter operations, and she heard the immediate response from the F-22 lead pilot, his voice carrying a tone of shock that was completely unprofessional by normal standards. Say again, call sign, aircraft in distress? The F-22 pilot's voice had gone from routine professionalism to intense focus in the span of one sentence. Blade lead, this is Valkyrie, currently aboard United 2847 with captain incapacitation, assisting first officer with emergency coordination. Request visual assessment and stand by for possible support. Maya kept her transmission professional and concise, but she knew the F-22 pilots would be processing the implications of hearing that call sign from a commercial airliner emergency. There was a pause, and then the F-22 lead came back on frequency with a tone that Maya recognized as someone trying to maintain composure while dealing with something completely unexpected. Valkyrie, Blade lead copies. Ma'am, we are positioning for visual assessment. Just to confirm, are you Valkyrie Actual from the 388 Fighter Wing? Maya hesitated, knowing that confirming her identity would open doors she had kept closed for 3 years, but the situation demanded honesty. Blade lead affirmative. Currently serving with 160th SOAR, Black Hawk pilot, but prior F-16 experience. I'm coordinating the emergency response aboard United 2847. The F-22 pilot's response came immediately, and this time there was no hiding the awe in his voice. Valkyrie Actual, this is Major Scott Jennings, Blade lead. Ma'am, every fighter pilot in the Air Force knows your record. We are honored to support you. Whatever you need, we are at your disposal. Anderson glanced back at Maya with a confused expression, clearly wondering what had just happened and why F-22 pilots were treating a Black Hawk helicopter pilot with such profound respect. But Maya simply gestured for him to focus on flying while she continued coordinating with the fighters. Blade lead appreciate the support. Request visual assessment of United 2847 for any external abnormalities or concerns. We are executing normal approach to Las Vegas runway 25 left, medical emergency only, all systems normal. Blade led copies, moving into visual position now. The F-22s accelerated and climbed, their superior speed and maneuverability allowing them to rapidly close the distance to the 737. Within 2 minutes, Maya could see the distinctive profile of the Raptor stealth fighters taking up formation positions on either side of the commercial airliner, their swept wings and angular fuselages making them look like predatory birds escorting a lumbering transport. The sight was spectacular and unusual, 2 of America's most advanced combat aircraft flying formation with a civilian 737, and Maya knew passengers would be taking photos and wondering what was happening. Valkyrie, Blade lead has visual on United 2847. Aircraft appears normal, no external damage or abnormalities visible. Your approach profile looks perfect from our position. Confirming all emergency services are positioned at Las Vegas and runway is cleared. Blade lead, thank you for the assessment. Stand by for landing. Maya switched back to intercom to speak with Anderson. First Officer Anderson, you're doing great. F-22s confirm the aircraft looks perfect from outside. All you need to do now is fly a normal approach and landing. Configure the aircraft when ready, run your checklists and trust your training. Anderson nodded, his confidence visibly growing under Maya's steady guidance and the knowledge that he had support from both the woman behind him and the F-22. Fighters flying escort. He began configuring the 737 for landing, lowering flaps and stages and extending the landing gear, running through checklist items with methodical precision. The aircraft was at 5,000 feet now, fully configured and stable on final approach for runway 25 left, with clear weather and unlimited visibility making the landing as straightforward as possible under the circumstances. Maya continued monitoring Captain Morrison, who remained unconscious but stable, and she made sure the cabin crew had briefed passengers for landing and prepared for emergency evacuation if needed, though she did not anticipate any problems with the landing itself. Anderson was performing well now, his initial panic completely gone, replaced by focused concentration on executing proper procedures. They descended through 3,000 feet, 2,000 feet, 1,000 feet, and Maya watched as the runway grew larger in the windscreen ahead. 500 feet, Anderson called out, his voice steady. Airspeed good. Sync rate normal on glide path. Looking perfect, Maya confirmed. You're doing great. The 737's main gear touched down smoothly on the runway centerline, and Anderson deployed spoilers and thrust reversers exactly as trained, bringing the aircraft to a controlled stop with emergency vehicles already moving to intercept them. The landing had been textbook perfect, and Maya felt pride in Anderson's performance under pressure and gratitude that her presence had helped keep the situation from deteriorating into something worse. Las Vegas Tower directed them to taxi clear of the runway to an emergency staging area, and as the 737 came to a stop, paramedics were already rushing toward the aircraft to treat Captain Morrison. Maya helped coordinate the emergency crew's access to the cockpit while making sure passengers remained calm and seated until the situation was properly managed. Captain Morrison was quickly removed on a stretcher, still unconscious but receiving expert medical care, and Maya felt confident he would survive thanks to their rapid response and efficient landing. Anderson turned to Maya as the immediate crisis ended, his expression showing profound gratitude mixed with confused curiosity. "Major Chin, I don't know how to thank you. You saved all of us by keeping me calm and helping coordinate everything. But I have to ask, what was that about with the F-22 pilots? Why were they treating you like some kind of legend?" Maya smiled slightly, knowing the truth would come out now anyway. "Before I flew Black Hawks, I spent 8 years flying F-16 fighters in combat. I flew missions in Iraq and Syria, accumulated about 1,500 combat hours, and earned a certain reputation in the fighter community. My call sign is Valkyrie, given after a particularly difficult mission where things went very wrong but ended well. Fighter pilots tend to remember stories like that." Anderson stared at her with dawning understanding. "You're a fighter pilot? I mean, you were a fighter pilot? And now you fly helicopters." "I'm an Army pilot now," Maya confirmed. "I transitioned to helicopters 3 years ago because I wanted to work more directly with Special Operations Forces. But yes, I flew fighters before that, and apparently my reputation followed me more than I expected." She gestured toward the window where the F-22s were still visible circling overhead. "Those pilots recognized my call sign and knew my record. Fighter aviation is a small community and people remember missions that become famous." The full impact of what had happened was beginning to sink in for Anderson and for the passengers and crew who had overheard the radio communications and were now putting together the pieces. The quiet woman in jeans and an Army t-shirt who had seemed like just another military traveler was actually a combat veteran fighter pilot who had commanded respect from F-22 Raptor pilots and had used her extraordinary experience to guide them through an emergency that could have ended in disaster. Jessica, the flight attendant, appeared in the cockpit doorway with an expression of shock and gratitude. "Major Chin, passengers are asking about you. Someone recorded the radio transmissions and posted online that F-22 pilots called you Valkyrie and said every fighter pilot knows your record. Is it true you're a famous combat pilot?" Maya sighed, knowing her privacy was gone but accepting it with good grace. "I flew fighters in combat for several years before transitioning to Army aviation. I had some successful missions that people remember. But right now the important thing is that everyone is safe and Captain Morrison is getting medical care. That's what matters." But the story was already spreading through the cabin and beyond. Passengers were searching online for information about Valkyrie, and within minutes they were finding news articles and military websites describing missions flown by Major Maya Chin, an F-16 pilot who had earned the Distinguished Flying Cross for a mission over Syria where she had coordinated the rescue of a downed American pilot while simultaneously directing air strikes and flying her own battle-damaged fighter back to base. They found articles about other missions where she had provided close air support that had saved American ground forces, about her transition to Army aviation and her work with Special Operations Forces, and about her reputation as one of the most accomplished combat pilots of her generation. The F-22 pilots, Major Scott Jennings and his wingman Captain Laura Davidson, landed at Nellis Air Force Base and immediately requested permission to visit Las Vegas McCarran to meet with Valkyrie, a request that was granted given the unusual circumstances. They arrived at the gate where United 2847 was parked just as passengers were being allowed to deplane, and both F-22 pilots approached Maya with expressions of genuine respect and admiration. "Major Chin, I'm Scott Jennings and this is Laura Davidson," the lead F-22 pilot said, extending his hand. "Ma'am, it is an honor to meet you. Your mission over Syria is required study material for every fighter pilot going through advanced tactical training. You saved Lieutenant Parker's life that day and demonstrated tactical brilliance that people still analyze and try to learn from." Maya shook their hands, feeling slightly embarrassed by the attention but touched by their sincerity. "Thank you, Major Jennings. That mission was team effort involving a lot of people doing their jobs under difficult circumstances. And today was the same thing just in a different aircraft. First Officer Anderson did excellent work landing this 737 under pressure. But you guided him through it," Anderson interjected, having followed Maya out of the cockpit. "I was losing it, panicking, and you kept me calm and focused. You used some kind of tactical coaching that made me believe I could handle it, and that made all the difference." Captain Davidson, the F-22 wingman, looked at Maya with obvious curiosity. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, why did you leave fighters for helicopters? You were one of the best fighter pilots in the Air Force. That transition doesn't make sense to most people." Maya considered the question, which she had answered many times over the past 3 years, usually to fighter pilots who thought she was crazy for giving up the prestige and excitement of flying high-performance jets. "I loved flying fighters," she said honestly. But after 8 years and multiple combat deployments, I wanted to do something that felt more directly connected to helping people on the ground. Special operations helicopter pilots work directly with ground forces, inserting teams, providing support, and executing rescues. That appealed to me more than continuing to fly fighters. It was the right decision for me, even though it meant starting over with a new aircraft type. And now you fly Black Hawks with the 160th? Jennings asked. Night Stalkers. Yes. Been with them for about 2 years now after transitioning through Black Hawk qualification. It's completely different from fighters but equally challenging and rewarding. I get to combine tactical thinking from my fighter background with helicopter precision, and I work with some of the best special operations forces in the world. The conversation continued as they walked through the terminal, with more passengers stopping to thank Maya and ask for photos or autographs as word spread about who she was and what she had done. The airline management was coordinating accommodations and rebooking for passengers who had been traumatized by the emergency, and they made special arrangements to thank Maya personally for her assistance in managing the crisis. News media had already picked up the story from passenger social media posts, and reporters were requesting interviews about the legendary fighter pilot turned Black Hawk aviator who guided a commercial airliner to safety after the captain collapsed. Maya handled the attention with grace but firmly declined most interview requests, explaining that she was just doing what any experienced pilot would do in similar circumstances and that First Officer Anderson deserved credit for his professional performance under pressure. She deflected questions about her combat missions by noting that many details remained classified and that her focus now was on her current duties with Army aviation rather than past achievements with the Air Force. But the story had taken on a life of its own, with aviation enthusiasts and military supporters fascinated by the dramatic emergency and the unexpected revelation that a combat legend had been traveling as an anonymous passenger. The fact that F-22 Raptor pilots had responded to her call sign with such obvious respect added a layer of drama that captured public imagination, and within hours the incident was trending on social media with hashtags celebrating both her past achievements and her current service. The airline CEO personally called Maya to express gratitude and offered her unlimited free travel on their airline for life, an offer she politely declined while accepting a more modest token of appreciation. The Air Force Chief of Staff sent a message congratulating her on her continued service and thanking her for representing military aviation with such distinction. Her commander with the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment called to check on her welfare and express pride in her performance, noting that her actions had demonstrated exactly the kind of tactical thinking and crisis management ability that made her such an asset to Special Operations Forces. Captain Morrison survived his cardiac event and made a full recovery after emergency surgery in Las Vegas, and he specifically requested to meet with Maya before she continued her journey home. They met in his hospital room 3 days later, after he had been cleared by doctors and was preparing for transfer to a cardiac rehabilitation facility. He was pale and weak but conscious and grateful, and his first words to Maya were simple thanks for saving his life and the lives of everyone aboard his aircraft. "Major Chin, I understand that you're a fighter pilot," Morrison said, his voice still weak but clear. "I mean, you were a fighter pilot and now you fly helicopters, and you're famous in military aviation circles even though none of us knew who you were when you boarded that flight. The F-22 pilots told me stories about missions you flew that sound like something from a movie. I can't believe you were just sitting there in coach and nobody realized we had someone with your capabilities aboard." Maya smiled. "Captain Morrison, I was just a passenger. I don't advertise my background because I prefer to keep my military service separate from civilian life. But when you collapsed, my training took over and I did what I've been trained to do, which is manage emergencies and help people get through crisis situations. First Officer Anderson did the hard work of actually flying and landing the aircraft. I just helped keep things organized. Anderson told me you saved him from panicking and coached him through the emergency with some kind of tactical techniques that kept him focused and confident. He said you made him believe he could handle it, and that belief made all the difference between a successful landing and a disaster. I've worked with a lot of young pilots under stress," Maya acknowledged. "Special operations aviation involves constant pressure and high-stakes decisions, and I've learned how to help people perform at their best even when they're scared or overwhelmed." Anderson had all the skills he needed. He just needed someone to help him access those skills under pressure. They talked for another 30 minutes, with Morrison asking questions about her transition from fighters to helicopters and her work with Special Operations Forces, and Maya answering what she could while maintaining appropriate operational security about classified missions and capabilities. When she finally left the hospital, Maya felt satisfaction that Morrison would recover and that the emergency had ended with everyone surviving and no lasting harm beyond the temporary disruption to their travel plans. The journey home to Los Angeles was anticlimactic after the drama of the emergency landing. Maya flew on a different airline, deliberately choosing a later flight to avoid media attention, and she managed to complete the trip without incident or recognition. But she knew her anonymous days of traveling as just another military passenger were probably over, because the story of Valkyrie guiding the commercial flight to safety had become too famous for her to return to obscurity. Back at Fort Carson, her unit welcomed her with a combination of pride and teasing about her newfound celebrity status. Her fellow Black Hawk pilots joked that they had been flying with a legend without realizing it, and special operations soldiers who had worked with her on missions expressed respect for her fighter pilot background that they had not fully understood before. Her commander pulled her aside to discuss the publicity and its implications for operational security, but he concluded that no actual classified information had been compromised and that the positive attention reflected well on both Army Aviation and Special Operations Forces. Maya returned to her regular duties flying Black Hawks in support of Special Operations missions, combining her tactical expertise with helicopter precision to accomplish objectives that required both strategic thinking and precise execution. She flew night infiltrations that inserted Special Forces teams into hostile territory, provided armed support during high-risk operations, and executed emergency extractions that saved lives under fire. The missions were dangerous and demanding, but they gave her a sense of purpose and connection to the people she supported that she had never felt flying fighters alone at 30,000 feet. But she also maintained connections with the fighter community through the F-22 pilots who had escorted her emergency landing and through other aviators who reached out after learning about her background. She accepted invitations to speak at aviation conferences and military training programs, sharing lessons from her combat experience and her transition between aircraft types, hoping to inspire other pilots to pursue excellence regardless of what aircraft they flew or what missions they performed. The commercial captain's medical emergency and her response became a case study in aviation crisis management, analyzed in airline training programs and military leadership courses as an example of how experience, calm decision-making and effective communication could prevent disasters. The recording of her radio transmissions with the F-22 pilots became famous in aviation circles, particularly the moment when Major Jennings recognized her call sign and responded with such obvious respect and admiration. Maya never sought fame or attention from the incident, but she accepted that her story had resonated with people for reasons that went beyond aviation. It was a story about hidden excellence revealed under pressure, about diverse experiences combining to create unique capabilities, and about military service that continued across different roles and different aircraft but always with the same commitment to excellence and service. People saw in her story a reminder that extraordinary individuals often move among us unrecognized until circumstances reveal their true capabilities, and that the quiet person sitting next to you might possess experiences and abilities that would amaze you if you knew their full story. Years later, when Maya eventually retired from military service after completing her 20-year career, she was recognized as one of the most accomplished and versatile aviators in American military history, having logged thousands of hours in both fixed-wing fighters and rotary-wing special operations aircraft, having flown countless combat and special operations missions, and having saved lives in both military and civilian contexts. Her call sign Valkyrie remained legendary in aviation communities, but she was equally respected for her Black Hawk expertise and her work with special operations forces that had expanded her capabilities far beyond what any single aircraft type could provide. The incident aboard United Flight 2847 became just one story among many in a career filled with extraordinary achievements, but it remained special because it represented the moment when her carefully maintained privacy ended and the world discovered that the quiet Black Hawk pilot was actually a combat legend whose experience spanned the entire spectrum of military aviation. And for the 163 passengers and crew who had been aboard that flight when Captain Morrison collapsed, Maya Chen would always be the woman who had calmly taken control of an impossible situation and guided them all to safety through skills and experience that nobody had suspected she possessed until the moment when those capabilities became the difference between survival and disaster.